Of course, the night descended on Astoria, Oregon, cloaked in a cold Pacific Northwest rain. The rain didn't roar, it drifted, a persistent damp mist that soaked into the very grain of the old wooden houses, blurring the neon glow of the riverside bars. The Columbia River below churned a sullen gray, silent and menacing. In the quiet of the detective's office, with only the rhythmic tick of a wall clock and the soft drumming of rain against the window, Detective Jack Riley read the forwarded message again. It was a short, desperate plea sent from the phone of a kindergarten teacher named Sarah Jenkins. "Jack, please come. I'm scared." A plea swallowed by the rain, and then silence. The next morning, as a weak sun struggled to pierce the thick blanket of clouds, Riley stood on the porch of a small house on Franklin Street. It was a two-story wooden home, its blue paint faded and peeling, nestled between older brick buildings. Its stillness in the middle of a bustling morning was an unsettling contrast. The air inside was heavy, a suffocating mix of mildew from the damp walls, the sharp, coppery tang of blood, and the rich, creamy aroma of a pot of clam chowder growing cold on the stove. The only light came from the dancing beams of the forensics team's flashlights, casting long, trembling shadows across the plaster walls and the cracked linoleum floor. In the center of the living room, a dark pool of blood had soaked into the fibers of a beige braided rug, and there, face down, was Sarah Jenkins, the 32-year-old teacher, a woman who spent her days comforting children, was now still. Her long blonde hair was wet, matted against a cheek he couldn't see. Her hands were outstretched, her fingers curled as if trying to grasp something that was no longer there. Riley narrowed his eyes. Beside the body lay a standard claw hammer, its handle made of black fiberglass, its silver metal head stained with fresh blood and tangled with a few strands of hair. The medical examiner's initial report was clinical and brutal. The victim had died from a single powerful blow from behind, shattering the skull. The force of the impact had been so great that blood had spattered against the wall behind her, creating a ghastly fan-shaped spray of crimson. Riley moved slowly, his eyes scanning, absorbing every detail. He walked into the adjoining kitchen. The pot of clam chowder sat on the stove, a skin forming on its surface. A dinner that would never be eaten. This detail always bothered Riley the most. It was a cruel, tangible reminder of a normal life violently interrupted. Sarah had been unsuspecting. She was cooking a meal, perhaps waiting for her husband, in the supposed safety of her own home, just before the nightmare began. Near the sink, a metal ladle had a smear of dark red on it. The initial theory was that the victim might have reached for a nearby paring knife, a desperate, futile attempt at self-defense she never had the chance to complete. The attacker had struck while her guard was down, then planned to clean up. But no plan is ever perfect. By the back door, which led to a small yard and a dark alleyway, Riley found what the killer had left behind. Footprints. Thick, wet mud prints, still fresh. The tread pattern and size were all wrong. They weren't the heavy, thick-soled work boots that Mark Jenkins, the victim's husband and a local construction worker, always wore. These belonged to someone else, an intruder who had entered from the rear. The investigation began with scattered, disconnected pieces of a broken mirror. Just inside the doorway, near a small table where keys were kept, officers found a man's black leather wallet. Inside was a small amount of cash and a single elegant business card. It bore the name David Russo with the address of a high-end jewelry store on Commercial Street. The card itself wasn't proof of guilt, but it was the first thread to pull from the tangled mess. Who was David Russo, and why was his wallet in Sarah Jenkins's house on the night she was murdered? The few witness statements only deepened the mystery. A homeless man who often took shelter under a nearby storefront awning reported that around 9 in the evening, not long after he saw Sarah get out of a taxi, he heard a sound like breaking glass, followed almost immediately by a dull, heavy thud. A college student in the apartment upstairs claimed she heard a muffled scream, faint and short, almost indistinguishable from the sound of the wind whistling through the alleyways. It was all over in an instant, lost in the noise of the storm. Riley returned to the body. He pulled on a pair of latex gloves and gently turned over Sarah's tightly clenched hand. A professional instinct urged him to look. He was right. Clutched in her palm, caught between her cold fingers, was a small piece of fabric, a thick red flannel with black stripes. It didn't belong to any of the curtains, the upholstery, or anything else in the house. Riley knew that instantly. This was a piece of the killer's shirt, or something he carried with him, a fatal mistake. He carefully retrieved the fabric with tweezers, sealing it in an evidence bag. The DNA on that small scrap could be the golden key to the entire case. Sarah's phone, found in her coat pocket, revealed a shocking twist. The message, "Jack, please come. I'm scared," hadn't been sent by her. She had received it. It came from a number not saved in her contacts at 8:45 that evening. Someone had been luring her. The use of a first name suggested familiarity, but the message itself was laced with danger. Riley considered two possibilities. The sender was her husband, Mark Jenkins, setting the stage for some kind of domestic confrontation. Or it was a third party, someone involved in a secret, complicated relationship with the victim. The case began to veer into darker territory. The initial DNA results from the red flannel fabric were a major breakthrough. The DNA did not belong to Mark Jenkins. This confirmed the presence of a third man at the scene at the time of the murder, a ghost who had yet to be identified. Mark, the husband, was temporarily relieved of the primary suspicion, but he was clearly hiding something. His frantic demeanor and contradictory statements suggested he knew far more than he was letting on. Riley had his team dig into the unknown number that had texted Sarah. The truth began to surface. It was a disposable burner phone, one that Sarah used for private communications. The call log from that phone led to a single name, David Russo, the man from the jewelry store. The records showed that Sarah and Russo had met frequently and discreetly, meetings she had obviously concealed from her husband. When brought in for questioning, David Russo, a handsome man with a polished veneer, was exceedingly cooperative. He admitted his relationship with Sarah. He claimed that on the night of the murder, he had only stopped by to return her wallet, which she had left at his store. Russo insisted he was there for only a few minutes before returning to his shop, even producing a work order to prove he was finishing a custom ring for a client. He vehemently denied having a key to Sarah's house. Russo's story was smooth, but Riley's gut told him something was wrong. Behind the calm facade, there was a flicker of anxiety in Russo's eyes he couldn't quite hide. Just as the investigation seemed to be centering on a complex love affair, an unexpected break came. The investigative team had patiently sifted through hours of security footage from the area. A traffic camera a few blocks from the scene had captured a crucial image. At 9:05 in the evening, a man in a flannel shirt wearing a baseball cap pulled down low was seen walking quickly, his head bowed, turning into the alley behind Sarah's house. The pattern of the flannel shirt, though blurry in the low-light footage, appeared identical to the scrap of fabric Riley had found, and the mud caking the cuffs of his jeans seemed to match the prints at the scene. At the same time, a new detail emerged from a neighbor, a Mrs. Gable. She lived in the building across the street, her bedroom window looking directly into the Jenkinses' home. Initially reluctant to get involved, a guilty conscience had compelled her to come forward. On the night of the rainstorm, she had heard Sarah's voice cut through the wind, a desperate, choked cry, "Don't do that!" It was followed by a loud bang, and then nothing but the mournful sound of the rain. This testimony contradicted the theory of a surprise attack. It pointed to a confrontation, a struggle that had taken place just before the fatal blow. And then the biggest shock of all arrived. The fingerprint analysis from the hammer, the murder weapon, was complete. The clear, distinct prints on the fiberglass handle did not belong to David Russo, nor to any unknown assailant in the system. They were a perfect match for Mark Jenkins, the victim's husband. Everything was turned on its head. Mark, whom Riley had nearly cleared, was suddenly the prime suspect. When he was brought in for a second time, confronted with the irrefutable evidence, Mark finally broke. He slumped in his chair, burying his face in his hands, and began to confess. But his confession was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new, far more complicated chapter. Mark admitted that on that night, after a strange, brief call from his wife, he had felt a gnawing unease and left the bar where he'd been drinking with friends. When he arrived home, he found the back door ajar. An icy dread washed over him. He rushed inside. The first thing he saw was the woman he loved, motionless in a pool of blood. Beside her lay his own hammer and a discarded flannel shirt on the floor. Mark said he completely lost his mind. In a fog of beer and sheer terror, he did something incredibly foolish. He picked up the hammer. He picked up the flannel shirt. He didn't know what to do, convinced he would be the first one they'd blame. He was terrified. He grabbed the shirt, threw it in the kitchen trash can, and fled his own home, driving blindly to his mother's house in the next town, trying to create an alibi for himself. He even remembered the detail of the torn piece of flannel clutched in his wife's hand, a detail only someone who had been at the scene could have known. Mark's story was a tangled mess of truth and panic. Riley believed he was telling the truth about his actions, but he didn't believe Mark was the killer. A single, precise and brutal blow like that required a cold-bloodedness that didn't fit the profile of a panicked, grieving husband. And why would the real killer be so careless as to leave his weapon and his shirt behind? Mark's confession, in its own way, proved the existence of the man in the flannel shirt. But who was he? And why was Mark, by disposing of the evidence, seemingly trying to protect him? Or was there a conspiracy at play, with Mark as a pawn? The case was back to square one, but now it was shrouded in an even thicker fog. Riley decided they had to go back. He had a persistent feeling that he had missed something, a small but critical detail overlooked in the chaos of the initial investigation and the subsequent shocking revelations. He and a small team returned to the house on Franklin Street. This time their search was methodical, painstaking. They checked every inch, and their patience paid off. In the plastic trash can under the kitchen sink, the one they had initially dismissed, they found it, the red and black flannel shirt, still damp and stained with dried blood. And tangled beneath it was the black leather wallet, David Russo's wallet. Why would Mark throw Russo's wallet in the trash? Did he know who it belonged to and was trying to protect the man having an affair with his wife? Riley took Russo's business card and examined it under a magnifying lamp. This time he saw it, a tiny, almost invisible detail on the glossy surface of the card, a faint, pinkish smudge. He sent it to the lab immediately. The analysis was stunning. It was a lipstick print, and its chemical composition was a match for the lipstick found in Sarah Jenkins's purse. This confirmed it. David Russo hadn't just returned a wallet. He and the victim had shared an intimate moment, a kiss, shortly before the tragedy. Their affair was real and recent. The discoveries didn't stop there. As a young detective re-examined the floor near the kitchen cabinets, he noticed a small piece of paper, wet and stuck in a crack in the linoleum. The paper was mangled, but the hastily scrawled words were still legible under a special light. "If you talk, I won't let you go." A clear threat. A threat aimed at Sarah. What secret was she about to reveal? The affair with Russo or something far more dangerous? Simultaneously, the tech team working on the security footage had their own breakthrough. Using advanced software, they managed to enhance and isolate the audio from the security camera at Russo's jewelry store. Though faint and distorted by street noise, a man's whispered voice was audible. "Sarah, don't go there. It's not safe." The voice cut off, but it was enough. It proved David Russo had lied. He knew about a dangerous appointment, a meeting he had warned her away from. Digging deeper into Russo's restored phone data, detectives found a deleted text message. At 8:30 on the night of the murder, Russo had sent a message to another burner phone number. "Meet me at the Rusty Anchor Cafe. Urgent." The time and place matched security footage from that very cafe, and the burner phone Russo had contacted, once traced, revealed the missing link. The killer had used it to communicate with both Russo and Sarah. He was the intermediary, the mysterious linchpin holding the entire deadly affair together. Another clue came from a convenience store camera near the riverfront. It showed a tall man in a dark raincoat buying a packet of beef jerky and a can of soda. He then walked in the direction of the victim's house. Bizarrely, the man was seen tearing open the packet of beef jerky and pouring the contents into a white plastic bag. A similar plastic bag containing pieces of beef jerky had been found in Sarah's kitchen, dismissed as simple trash. Why would a killer bring beef jerky to a murder scene? It was an absurd, illogical act, but its very strangeness made it a unique behavioral fingerprint. Riley sent the forensics team back to the alley one last time, this time armed with UV lights. Under the purple glow, the muddy shoe prints became sharper, clearer. They ran the length of the back path. They were from a pair of athletic shoes, size 11, with a distinctive tread pattern. A quick canvass of local shoe stores identified 12 pairs of identical shoes, in that exact size, sold within the last week. A list of 12 names was compiled. The portrait of the suspect was now coming into sharp focus. He was the man in the flannel shirt who wore size 11 athletic shoes. He used burner phones. He knew both Sarah and Russo. He had met with Russo at the cafe and lured Sarah to her home. He was the one who had threatened her. He was the one who had brought beef jerky, and he was the one who had swung the hammer. By combining all the evidence, the list of 12 shoe buyers was narrowed down. Riley cross-referenced the names with the social circles of both the Jenkins family and David Russo, and then one name clicked into place, matching every single detail with cold, perfect precision. Paul Finch, 35 years old, a printer at a small print and copy shop in the old commercial district. And most importantly, Finch was a high school classmate of Mark Jenkins. And, according to a few mutual friends, Finch had been hopelessly, obsessively in love with Sarah ever since they were teenagers. A silent, unrequited love. A chill ran down Riley's spine, all the pieces fit. The motive wasn't a simple love triangle or a crime of passion. It was something older, more insidious. A love that had been denied, that had been left to fester for 2 decades, curdling into a sick and dangerous obsession. Paul Finch was arrested at his print shop. He offered no resistance, his face a mask of unnerving calm, as if he had been expecting this moment. At first, Finch told a carefully constructed lie. He admitted to being at the house. He claimed he'd witnessed a fight between Mark and Sarah, and that in the struggle, the hammer had accidentally slipped from Mark's hand, striking Sarah. He had panicked and fled. It was a story designed to deflect all blame onto the grieving husband. But Riley knew Finch was lying. Forensic evidence never lies. The search of Finch's home and the analysis of his clothing provided the final, irrefutable proof. Under Sarah's fingernails, forensics found microscopic fibers from the red flannel shirt, a perfect match to the one in the trash. This proved a struggle had occurred, but the checkmate piece of evidence was found on the sports jacket Finch was wearing when he was arrested. It had tiny, atomized specks of blood on it. The lab confirmed it was Sarah's blood. But mixed with the blood were traces of cayenne printing ink, a specific type used only at Finch's shop. This detail shattered his alibi. A killer couldn't be wearing a flannel shirt and a sports jacket at the same time. Riley laid out the timeline. Finch had worn the flannel shirt to commit the murder, then he had removed it, leaving it behind with the hammer and Russo's wallet to create chaos and misdirection, before putting on a different jacket to walk away, creating a clean escape. Confronted with the undeniable evidence, with the cold, sharp logic of Detective Jack Riley's reconstruction, Paul Finch's wall of composure finally crumbled. He lowered his head to the metal table, his thin shoulders shaking, and began to confess the entire tragic truth. A truth of obsession and utter desperation. He admitted to his lifelong, unrequited love for Sarah. It had never faded, only twisted into an obsession that consumed him. He knew about her affair with Russo, and it filled him with a potent cocktail of jealousy and rage. That night he had lured her home not with the immediate intent to kill, but for a final confrontation. He wanted to confess his feelings, to have one last chance. But when he arrived, he overheard her talking about ending her affairs and recommitting to her husband, Mark. For Finch, that was the final door slamming shut in his face. When Sarah saw him and reacted with fear, trying to call her husband, something inside Finch snapped. The rage, jealousy, and despair repressed for 20 years erupted. He was no longer in control. He swung the hammer just once at the woman who was the center of his twisted world. In his confession, Finch explicitly confirmed that neither David Russo nor Mark Jenkins had any involvement in Sarah's death. Russo was merely a rival, and Mark a grieving husband who had made foolish choices in a state of panic. No evidence linked either of them to the crime of murder. Justice was served. Paul Finch was charged with first-degree murder. The case was closed, but its ghost lingered in the damp streets of Astoria. Detective Jack Riley stood on the waterfront watching the lights of the Astoria-Megla Bridge stretch across the dark expanse of the river. He thought of Sarah Jenkins, of the pot of cold clam chowder, of the final, fearful text message. He thought of Paul Finch, of a love that didn't blossom but instead curdled into a cruel tragedy. Behind every case, there wasn't just a killer and a victim. There was a story of the darkest corners of the human heart, where love and obsession are separated by the thinnest of lines. The rain had stopped, but the air in Astoria still felt heavy, laden with a sorrow that had no name.